In building our new house, deciding where to put the garden is an important consideration for us.
That's right. There's a lot more to it than just deciding I'm going to stick some flowers over there.
Or vegetables over here. I'm Elliot Coleman.
And I'm Barbara Damrosch. And if you'll stay with us for the next half hour, we'll give you some tips on where to put your gardens.
On gardening naturally.
The nice thing about flower gardens is that no matter what kind of site you have, whether it's sunny, shady, droughty, or boggy, there are some plants that are going to love that spot because that's the kind of place they choose to grow in nature. Now here I'm doing a full sun garden, and by that I mean 6 hours of good prime-time sun, say between 8 in the morning up until, say, 5. These are going to be the sun lovers that would naturally grow in open sunny meadows, the sunflower types, the daisy types. Here's a little early blooming goldenrod. That'll do fine here. Or over here, this little shrub potentilla. That's a sun lover. Or this yarrow here. And over here, I have my little mini prairie garden. These are all native prairie species that I've just planted. And the first one to make an appearance here is this golden Alexander's. Now, what would happen if I planted all of these in insufficient sun? Well, first of all, they might produce a nice mound of foliage, but the bloom wouldn't be very much. The other thing is that they would be very leggy. They'd send up these long, weak stalks as if they were somehow looking for some sun that never appeared. So that's what you'd want to avoid. As we get down to this end of the new garden, it's partly shady here, which gives me the chance to grow a stilby, fringed bleeding heart, forget-me-not, things that don't mind a little bit of shade. Unfortunately, we cut a tree down that now gives me more afternoon sun than I had before. Afternoon sun is much stronger than morning sun, and some of these may not like that too well. But fortunately, I have a lot of organic matter in the soil, which makes it retain a lot of moisture. It may be okay. If not, it doesn't matter because I'm going to extend this garden down till it's further in the shade, and I can always move them next year. Now, underneath this maple, we're getting a dense canopy of leaf. But fortunately, the branches don't start till they're about 40 feet up. And so we get a lot of ambient light in from the sides. Over there under that birch tree, that would be a wonderful site for a garden because the leaf canopy is even less dense over there, and it lets in a lovely dappled kind of light that many plants enjoy. Now, you have another problem gardening under trees, and that's the tree roots. They can compete for not only nutrients and space in the soil, but also moisture. It can be very dry under trees. But once again, there are some plants that'll do fine. I have found that this foam flower and also this mayapple make a nice carpet under trees and don't mind the roots at all. Now, I have my eye on another spot over there where it gets very moist, and that'll give me a chance to grow Joe Pye weed and spice bush and all sorts of nice plants that like to get their feet wet. One thing I don't have to worry about in this yard is a steep slope. The whole thing is as flat as a big picnic table. But if I did have a steep grade, it wouldn't be a major problem. I could either terrace it in stair steps, or, once again, I could find some plant that would actually thrive in that situation. Daylilies, for example. They have long finger-like roots that would actually help to hold a steep slope in place. One thing I have thought about here, though, is good air circulation. When I grow plants like phlox or bee balm or especially roses, I have to worry about good air circulation to help keep them healthy. When you have air moving around them, they're less prone to leaf spot disease and powdery mildew, problems like that. So I planted a row of roses here. I wanted a fence for them to lean against and an arbor for them to climb on, but I kept them nice and open, so plenty of air can get through here and keep these plants healthy. I think they'll do just fine. But you know, there's some situations where I actually want a rigid barrier behind the plants for other reasons. This little flower garden in front of the house faces south, so it gets plenty of sun, and the house protects it from the north wind in the wintertime. It's also the first thing that warms up in the springtime because the house actually holds heat and causes it to get so warm. That's why I planted these crocuses here. You can see the foliage. Well, this was a mass of bright yellow very early in the spring before anything was blooming anywhere else. And it was a welcoming sight when we came in the front door. Now, this area also has a drawback because of the roof overhang and the fact that there's a balcony right over it. So rain never falls on this garden. Well, I chose to place it near a spigot so that I can remember to water it from time to time. But just in case I forget, again, I've chosen plants that don't mind this particular situation. So I've picked some drought-tolerant species, like this baby's breath, or this pearly everlasting, or that yarrow over there, just as added insurance in case I get forgetful. But I try not to forget that flower gardens are to look at. So part of where I put them depends on where they're going to look the prettiest. Now, the new garden I showed you over there is starting to unfold in shades of bright yellow. There's going to be more of that, and some oranges and some reds, all hot colors that are easy to see from a distance because it's way across the lawn. Now, this little garden is right close to the house. It's very intimate, and I can do softer shades that would be completely lost over there. The lavenders, colors like that. So this garden is where Elliot and I get to indulge our passion for blue. Now, if I were to plant these blue flowers in the new garden across the lawn, they really wouldn't make much of an impression because blue recedes visually. You really don't see it until you get up close to it.
Oh, but this one is spectacular. This Veronica, what a beautiful color.
Isn't that intense? This is Crater Lake blue. It's just starting to come into flower. I really love it.
And notice how it's set off so nicely by the Artemisia. The colors really emphasize each other.
Yeah, it brings out the blueness. I did the same thing over here. I made a mirror image of the same clump. This time, I used snow in summer, a white accent to bring out the blue. I think that worked nicely.
I think it works beautifully.
You ever notice that blue goes with almost everything? Now, over here, I planted a catmint. This one is called Six Hills Giant. Boy, it sure is giant, isn't it? And I let some little violas come up through it. Makes a nice combination.
Yeah, they look like friends living together.
Yeah, well, I did the same thing over here. I did another Six Hills Giant, and some coral bells are threading their way up through. Those are about to open all pink.
Of all the flowers in here, though, the one I think is most spectacular is this perennial geranium. It has so many blossoms on it, it looks like one big flower.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? It's called grandiflorum. It sure is grand.
It's well named. Now, these are nice, Barbara.
Yeah, I've been playing around with a lot of salvias. Like this one that's just opening up is called May Night. That's a hybrid kind, and it's going to have really dark purpley blue flowers. But that's just a wild blue salvia that I dug out of our neighbor's yard, and it's just taking over, and it's got these big galumpy plants with great big stalks, and I really like it. It's exuberant.
You can tell a wild plant because it has vigor to it, much more so than this little hybridized model for the garden.
Yeah, it has vigor, but it's been obviously bred to be a compact plant.
Yeah, and look at the bees on here. They love these flowers.
Yeah, they really do. I really think this is our favorite garden. We spend so much time here. When we sit here, we're just in this circle of flowers with butterflies all around us. When I designed this garden, I thought about not only how it would feel to sit inside it, but how I would be viewing it. For instance, when I'm standing at the kitchen sink, I look out the kitchen window and I see it. When I'm sitting on the couch in the living room, I look out the window and I see it. And when I'm upstairs in the bedroom or on the balcony, I see the garden.
Very often, this is the first thing I look out and see in the morning, and it doesn't make any difference whether it's a sunny day or a rainy day. What a nice way to start the day.
I don't think a day goes by without us having a meal at this table, just so we can appreciate this garden.
You know, that's one of the things to think about when you're siting the garden. Not only where it's going to go, but where it's going to go so you can see it, so you can enjoy it, so you can really make it a part of your life.
Familiar with the tall garden phlox that you see all the time. It blooms in mid to late summer. But you may not know this little phlox called Phlox divaricata, or wild blue phlox. It's very charming. The flower is the same as the big phlox, but it only grows about a foot tall, 1.5 feet tall. And it's much earlier than the big phlox. This is the end of May, and here it is blooming its head off. It's naturally a woodland flower. It likes a nice woodsy soil full of organic matter. It'll take shade, part shade, and probably quite a bit of sun, as long as you keep that kind of moist, woodsy soil around it. Now, I put this in the garden about 10 days ago, and you can see how well it's established itself already, and it's going to really spread throughout this little area. It'll self-sow and form a carpet, which is exactly what I want it to do. In fact, one of the nicest ways to use it would be to plant it among tulips, which would come up through it, and they'd both bloom at the same time, complementing each other beautifully. I think the best thing about it, though, is the smell. Gardening Naturally now returns on TLC.
I'm a fan of straight rows in the garden. I always use a garden line to keep them straight. But you have to reel it up somehow, so I made a simple rig with a cleat attached to a stick. It's not perfect. It's hard to pull off sometimes, and when I reel it back up, it gets twisted because I'm always going in the same direction. I thought I could improve it, so I made this one. Pulls off easily, not bad, just off a couple of studs, and then I wind it back up by going alternate sides. It works nicely, but it really isn't elegant. This is a store-bought model, works with a reel, and you can just reel the string back up, solves a lot of those problems. In fact, I know gardeners have taken old fishing reels and the end of an old fishing pole and made a really nice garden line. Well, I didn't have one around, so I put this together. Just a piece of wood, some washers in there, a little knob, and now I can twist it and reel things up very easily. Probably my best effort yet.
I think my garden line is better.
What's that?
Why don't you come up and see my tomatoes sometime?
It's really worth spending a little time choosing a site for the vegetable garden. Even if you're on a landscape like this, it really doesn't have many limitations. I had a choice of almost anywhere in an area as large as this, and the considerations I went through to choose this site were the most important ones. First, you need sun. And since the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, if the garden can face south, you're going to get the maximum amount of sun during the day. If the garden also is on a piece of land that slopes to the south, the sun will warm the soil up better. In fact, studies have shown that a garden on a 5% slope actually has the same solar climate as a garden that's 300 miles to the south. Now, if it's on a slope like that, another advantage is that the slope to the north of you will protect you from north winds, and so you're in a slightly sheltered location. That's also something to think about. Now we want to start thinking about soil. But before we get into soil type, that is whether it's clay or sandy, you want to think first about soil depth. So I came out here with a shovel, dug holes to make sure that I had a good 2 feet of depth here before I hit bedrock. In this area, it was no problem. But if the bedrock's only a foot down, your plants won't find enough root space to grow well. Now, I chose this site out of all the places I could be because this was a really nice soil, what's called a muck soil. It had been quite wet. And so that left me one consideration to think about when I put the garden here, and that's getting rid of the extra moisture. All I had to do was dig a ditch beneath it, and I was digging it anyway because I was putting a road in and I needed the drainage. That got the water out, plenty of root space, plenty of air for the roots, and an ideal situation. This really isn't a half-bad site. Slope to the south, plenty of sun coming in, wind protection on the north, a deep soil, and a fertile soil. Not every site is as ideal as this. Come on over to the house with me and I'll show you how we're dealing with a less perfect location. This is where Barbara and I are building a new house, and it's a real reality check for siting a vegetable garden. I don't have anywhere near the freedom I had in that field to put it wherever I might want. Well, the same concepts still apply. If I look at my compass, I know that south is there where the sun is coming from, and this wouldn't be a bad spot at all for the vegetable garden, but it's right in front of the house, and even someone who's as enthusiastic a vegetable gardener as I am knows that that's a better place for a flower garden. So I'm left with this side of the lawn, and I want to figure out how wide to make it, how long to make it, how far out here it can come. And the easiest way to decide that is to know what the sun is doing in relation to the trees that are to the south of me. And the easiest way to do that is to make a simple little gadget. made from a protractor, a string with a weight, and a little stick to sight along. Now, I went to the local library and I got some books on solar design, and I found out that in the latitude where we live, the summer sun is at about 75 degrees. So if I sight this at 75 degrees and look up along the stick, I can be sure that the sun at the height of summer is going to come over the top of that big tree and give me sun on the garden. Any further out and I'd have shade. Earlier in the year, when the sun's lower in the sky, it will have to come through this tree, but this is a deciduous tree. It will have lost its leaves, and before it gets leaves, the sun will be higher and I'll be all set. Now, as the season goes on, the sun gets lower and lower in the sky, the shadow line is going to be falling further and further along the garden. And I want to know where it's going to fall in winter, because I really like winter gardening, and I'd like to have a bunch of cold frames. Well, the spot for them is along the back side of the garden, and that same book in the library told me that the winter sun angle is at about 25 degrees here. So if I set this at 25 degrees and sight along it, I realize that the taller trees on the other side of the road that I can do nothing about won't cast shadow here even when the sun's at the depth in the sky, and my cold frames will get some sun. Now, another consideration I had to make here was the fact that this area was too low, too wet. And I couldn't put in a ditch like I did in the field. I had to raise the level. I used the soil that came out of the foundation of the house. It was there, and I wanted to make use of it. Now, it's not very fertile. Everybody knows that. So I tilled a lot of peat moss in, sowed it to clover, and I'm going to let it get fertility for a year, build itself up before I use it. Almost any soil, no matter how poor, can be made fertile using good natural techniques. And one other consideration with this site is that we are close to the road. Now, automobile traffic gives off certain pollutants, and when gardens are too close to the road, those pollutants can waft over and deposit on your vegetables. One easy way to solve that is either plant a hedge or you can put up a fence, as Barbara and I decided to do. But whatever your choice, it's always a good idea to try and put some sort of barrier between a heavily traveled road and your vegetable garden. Hi.
Hi. There's a couple of other things that I always think about when I'm trying to decide where to put a vegetable garden. I don't want it too far from the house. It has to be convenient so that I can make sure nothing gets out of hand. The peas are picked just when they're ripe.
Yum.
It gets watered when it needs watering, catch any problems before they get worse. But I think most important of all, I'm one of those impulsive cooks that has to rush out of the house in the middle of every meal, maybe a couple of times, and pick some ripe tomatoes for the salad or some spinach leaves for the soup, whatever I need at the spur of the moment.
Now, I'm an impulsive decorator. I love that last little sprig of parsley or chives. But the best thing about having the garden close to the house is if the garden is productive, you make sure all that production ends up on the table. You know, peas are one of my favorite vegetables. Not only are they delicious, but they come early, and they're really fun to grow. Because even though they look small here, they're going to grow tall, and they're going to come all the way, in the case of these sugar snaps here, to the very top of this trellis, and that's 6.5 feet tall. A full wall of peas. This other variety is a lower grower, but what the heck, so there's a little extra space. But the important thing is to make a trellis that's strong enough to hold them. This is good solid wood, and with a material that's a nylon netting made for this. Now, the tendency with peas is to go out and plant them and then think about the trellis later. Well, you don't want to do that because I guarantee you, you'll forget it and won't get it in on time. So get the trellis in and plant the peas. Because if you don't, once these little tendrils start hooking together, you're going to do them a lot of damage trying to fit this in at a later date. The real key in this is to make sure that the netting is taut. So when the heavy weight of the vines begins to pull on this, it can't bring it down and make your peas droop and fall off. I even put in stakes here and pin it right to the earth. And if you do this right, you're going to have a whole wall of delicious peas here fit for a whole summer of picking right up to the top. As the season advances and the peas start to climb this trellis, the structure becomes a home for crops that like it cool rather than hot. The shade from the peas as they go up and up makes ideal growing conditions for something like lettuce. Now, I've mulched these peas because they like the soil around their roots to be cool and moist. What could be better? Shade, cool, moist soil. If I make a little hole in the mulch, dig a little soil aside, I won't bother the peas just doing this every foot or so, but the lettuce is going to love it. This is the type of growing condition the lettuce would have in the spring, and now I've figured out how to continue them on into the heat of the summer. When I'm siting the vegetable garden, I like to think about 4 keys. Plenty of sun, good drainage, wind protection if I can find it, but best of all, I want it close to the kitchen, and then all the produce will end up on the table.
With a flower garden, it's even simpler because no matter where the garden is, you can find plants that are right for that spot. Just be sure to put them in the place where you're going to enjoy them the most.
And so for now, goodbye and good gardening. If you want more information on where to put your home garden, Barbara and I both recommend Designing and Maintaining Your Edible Landscape Naturally by Robert Couric. Robert's an imaginative writer, and this book is filled with the type of information you'll need to carry the project from start to finish.
Next on TLC, doing something for your home can be easy, even fun. Check and see here on Homebodies. Then, add value to your home with some serious improvements. The Home Pro shows you how.